Bigotry is inherently irrational. That's to say that there's no sound basis to hate a demographic, whether it be a certain ethnicity, religion, gender, or sexuality. It's therefore unsurprising when members of hate movements, such as gender-critical fascism, catch themselves out, refuting their core premise whilst trying to prop up said bigotry. That's what we're here to talk about today, specifically in relation to J.K. Rowling. But first, a quick content warning for the following: anti-Semitism, transphobia, racism, misogyny, Nazis, genocide, and sexual violence. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take the time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus, we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence for yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name's Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and today we're here to talk about how, in an attempt to silence the parent of a child with a trans friend, J.K. Rowling managed to refute her own position. We'll also be discussing her denial of the simple facts that promoting bigotry begets violence. So today's video centers on a tweet in which Rowling shared a screenshot of a post which read as follows. Quote, J.K. Rowling, my son has gone to have a week at his trans friend's house. Guess what? I'm not worried about that, but I am worried he'll get his head kicked in by a man, high on his hashtag toxic masculinity, and emboldened by the othering you perpetuate. Hashtag make violence is the issue. End quote. To which Rowling responded by mocking the message, declaring the following in a sarcastic manner. Quote, breaking, woman to blame for male violence that hasn't occurred. More news as we get it. End quote. Now, there's a lot to say about this, starting with the way in which Rowling attempts to sidestep the established facts that the way minority groups are talked about and presented in public, especially by figures with large platforms, such as herself, impacts the perception and subsequent treatment of said minority groups. This is not some hypothetical or unknown abstract. Human rights groups, including feminists, which Rowling claims to be, have been openly talking about this key issue for decades. Though focusing on cis women in particular, namely the idea that cis women can never be responsible for the violence enacted by cis men, we have plenty of historic examples where cis women have been the primary driver behind hate violence. One key example is the role white cis women played in propping up anti-black racism, particularly white cis women who exoticized, preyed upon, and subsequently accused black men of being sexual predators when they were rebuffed. Black men were hanged, not by white women themselves, but by the white men of the community who were invoked by said white women to enact violence on their behalf. Lynchings as a concept are largely defined by the involvement of white cis women to get white cis men to dole out violence. This is a phenomenon that continues to this very day, with the label Karen, as it was originally used by black communities online, being applied to white women who see it as their God-given right to harass black and other non-white people, and if they refuse to do as said white women demand, call upon white men, often police, to enact violence on their behalf. And it's not just black people who have been made to suffer this sort of violence either. This rhetoric has historically been used to demonize other groups, including trans people. When you, I don't know, promote comments framing trans women as foxes in a henhouse, painting them as inherently predatory, buddy up to and promote well-known bigots with a history of accusing a Jewish cabal of transing young girls as a means to sterilize them and bring about the extinction of white people, right to the defense of a literal fascist as she was being criticized for welcoming Sikh-hiding Nazis to her anti-trans hate rallies, not to forget countless other examples of abject cruelty and malice to your tens of millions of followers, that is going to have an impact on people's perceptions. You, J.K. Rowling, hitched yourself to gender-critical fascism, made it a part of your brand identity, and helped it go mainstream to the point that you, a non-specialist with zero expertise or lived experience in the field, are being invited to talk with major UK parties, including the current government, as an authority on trans rights. None of this is passive, and we are seeing the results of such hate. Between 2012 and 2022, as anti-trans narratives have grown, emboldened by people such as J.K. Rowling, we have seen a 13-fold increase in anti-trans hate crimes. That is an increase of 1,282%. That is what Rowling has opted to make herself a part of. Historic levels of anti-trans violence by presenting trans people, trans women in particular, as predatory monsters. This isn't violence that hasn't occurred, as Rowling asserts. This is recorded anti-trans violence. This is what Rowling is denying, which isn't all that surprising, considering how she has also gone on record publicly denying the crimes carried out by the Nazis as part of the Holocaust. That's just who Rowling is at this point. With all that noted, however, there's a much more fundamental flaw in Rowling's statement, and that's the fact that it's internally inconsistent with her own position. Because, whether she likes it or not, Rowling's entire brand at this point is based on blaming trans women for the supposed crimes of cis men. When they're pretending like they don't just hate trans people, Rowling and her associates claim that trans women being given access to women's spaces allows any cis man to claim he is a woman in order to gain access to and assault vulnerable girls and women. Thus, so they argue, trans women should be banned from women's spaces. So, in effect, trans women are being blamed and punished for the hypothetical subterfuge and violence carried out by cis men, revealing the hypocrisy in Rowling's statement. She's absolutely fine with blaming women for the crimes of men, not for any logical or historical reason, like we went over earlier, but because it serves her own irrational needs. But we can do better than merely refuting her position based on her own internal inconsistency. For you see, whilst there is evidence that rhetoric, like that promoted by Rowling, has led to an increase in anti-trans violence, there is no evidence that trans-inclusive policies make female-only spaces less safe. Starting with bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms, a 2019 study from the US that compared violence in said locations with trans-inclusive policies versus those without found that, quote, "This study presents findings from matched pairs analyses of localities in Massachusetts with and without gender identity inclusive public accommodations non-discrimination ordinances. Data come from public record request of criminal incident reports related to assault, sex crimes and voyeurism in public restrooms, locker rooms and dressing rooms to measure safety and privacy violations in these spaces. This study finds that the passage of such laws is not related to the number or frequency of criminal incidents in these spaces. Additionally, the study finds that reports of privacy and safety violations in public restrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms are exceedingly rare. This study provides evidence that fears of increased safety and privacy violations as a result of non-discrimination laws are not empirically grounded." End quote. Emphasis added by me. Moving on to hospitals, a 2022 Freedom of Information request sent out to 102 NHS Foundation trusts returned 0 complaints relating to the presence of trans women on women's hospital wards. This is something that has been enshrined in law since the 2010 Equality Act, meaning that 0 complaints over 12 years of trans inclusion. Moving on to prisons, following a series of suicides by trans women, including Vicky Thompson, the UK introduced its minimum mandatory requirements for trans prisoners in 2019. This led to an uproar about the danger said trans women posed, an argument Rowling recently repeated whilst going after David Tennant for defending his non-binary child. And yet, in 2023, then Prisons Minister Damian Hinds stated that, quote, "Since the 2019 strengthening of our policy, there have been no assaults or sexual assaults committed by transgender women in women's prisons, and last year we further strengthened that policy." End quote. Which just leaves us rape crisis centres. We have covered the facts that, far from trans women being a danger to rape crisis centres, it is, in fact, gender-critical fascists, such as J.K. Rowling, who are a threat. That, whilst there have been no reports of trans women posing any sort of risk from any organisation, there are numerous cases of gender-critical fascists targeting and abusing both staff and service users, literally targeting rape victims for being trans or trans-inclusive. Gender-critical fascists targeted and abused staff from Edinburgh's Rape Crisis Centre for electing an Indian trans woman, Mridul Vadra, to the role of CEO in 2021. Mridul was a veteran of the field, having worked at Rape Crisis Scotland, Forth Valley Rape Crisis Centre and Shakti Women's Aid without incident, and was thus a perfect fit for the job. Sadly, the racist and anti-trans abuse hurled at her and the rest of the staff forced the service to close down for a period due to the sheer volume of the abuse. Think about that. Gender-critical fascists care about women so much that they shut down one of the few services for victims of rape. Then, in July of 2022, a cis woman who made use of support groups organised by the Survivors Network in 2021 announced her plans to sue the group. Why? Well, because in spite of being clear that they're a gender-inclusive service that openly supports all people, including cis men, said cis woman took offence at the mere presence of a trans woman who was also using the service. The cis woman demanded that the Survivors Network kick said rape victim out onto the street. When the Survivors Network naturally refused, she began threatening them with lawsuit, raising just shy of £100,000 to sue a rape crisis centre for refusing to discriminate against a rape victim who just so happens to be a trans woman. I have no doubt that the case will be thrown out when it actually goes to court, but a part of me can only feel rage at the amount of money that will be wasted to fight such a sickening lawsuit. Point is, gender-critical fascists are the ones closing down and stripping rape crisis centres of money, actual, measurable harm, unlike Rowling's hypotheticals. It's much less the pot calling the kettle black and more the pot calling the polished silverware black. There's actually a term for this doing the rounds, calling it mirror propaganda. The term's apparently been around for a few years, but I've only started hearing it more recently. It puts a name to the whole "every accusation is a confession" phrase we've been using for years now. It refers to when a far-right group, like gender-critical fascists, accuse minority groups of doing the very thing that they themselves are doing. One key example is how people like Rowling cry that they've been silenced or cancelled to national and international papers, while simultaneously threatening trans people with slap suits for criticising their terrible behaviour. Then we have the way in which the wider gender-critical community loves to accuse trans people of being groomers, whilst they openly sexualise children and promote a book about a 30-year-old man kidnapping and raping a 12-year-old as a love story. Another obvious one is the way in which Rosie Duffield has accused trans people of being a danger to lesbians, when multiple lesbians quit working for her in the midst of a global pandemic because they felt unsafe around her anti-trans rhetoric. I'm also working on a video proving how Graham Linehan is pushing for child experimentation whilst accusing the trans community of doing just that. These are all examples of mirrored propaganda, and we see Rowling doing the very same thing here. Rowling is a much greater danger to cis women and women's services, yet she's out there pumping out the narrative that trans people are the real threat. Though what do you think? What are your thoughts about the term mirrored propaganda? What other contradictions can you think of when it comes to anti-trans rhetoric? What are your thoughts about the Labour Party inviting Rowling to talk as an authority on trans people? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gert Van Vorst, Goddess Alita, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, Higgins the Seagull, and Ocean on a Teaspoon. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.